So first we have a talk from Havi Carel, who's from the University of Bristol, and she's going to talk on bias in academia and equality.
Thank you so much. So as you may have made out, I'm not an engineer or a quantum physicist. I'm actually a philosopher in the philosophy department at Bristol. And I also do a university-wide role, which is called Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Champion. And I guess I came into the kind of purview of this conference because I was invited to Brazil by, I think it was Juani, right, who made contact with me. Huh? Yeah. Anyway, I couldn't go to Brazil, so I did the talk by Skype. But it was really great to actually see so many young people, early career folks, really interested, really concerned about equality, diversity, and inclusion. And I think I was asked to just do a very, very quick kind of EDI 101 for about 15 minutes before we go into the panel. So I think it would be really helpful to just give a little bit of context. So this is kind of my, this isn't my day job. My day job is philosophy research. This is my hobby or something I was kind of really interested in doing, but was never considered part of my academic role. And I think this is kind of the first problem we need to be mindful of, which is that there is a real sense, I think, in some higher education institutions that this kind of work is something that you do as because you're interested in lobbying for your particular group, women or non-white staff or LGBTQ+, whatever. And I think that's the first thing I want to kind of dispel, this idea that it's not generic to our work, that it's not intrinsic to our position as academics to care about EDI, not just because I'm a woman or I'm a whatever, but because we care in general about the environment we live in. The second myth, I guess, that's kind of useful to dispel is this idea that because we work in higher education institutions, because we're all highly educated, we're all kind of liberal-minded and fair and egalitarian, and therefore that we are not subject to the kinds of biases that can be conscious or unconscious, and the other psychological forms of that lead us to discriminate against others. Okay, so I think it's really important to remember that this phenomenon of implicit bias, it doesn't explain everything, but it explains a lot in terms of what we see on the ground. And I think what we see on the ground is a lot of disparity and a lot of variation. For example, if you look at women or UK black people or disabled people, you can see how underrepresented they are. And this is something that troubled me personally hugely in my own discipline in philosophy. And I think it's quite a nice sort of case study. Because what happened was that probably about 10 years ago, a bunch of women academics, philosophers, set up a blog called What It's Like to Be a Woman in Philosophy. And women started posting all kinds of things that happened to them in academia. And everything ranging from, being talked over at a meeting all the way to just sexual assault and rape. And everything in between, of course. So again, I think this idea that we can rest easy because we're all, as I said, educated, like-minded, egalitarian people, I think that's really one of the myths. I mean, if we see sexism and racism and transphobia outside the walls of a university or an institution, we shouldn't for a minute think that just because it says, University of X on the sign, that those biases, the discrimination, those attitudes don't seep into the institution. So what happened in philosophy is that women looked at this blog kind of intersected with some information coming out. And I think this might not be typical of your subject. Maybe women come in at lower numbers at undergraduate level, but this is very typical of arts and humanities subjects, and also social sciences, where women come in, as you see, roughly at 50%, but then are kind of weeded up en route to promotion. And the figures are still pretty dismal. There's still only about 21% of professors in the UK are female. Now, what this blog, the What's It Like to Be a Woman in Philosophy did, is it gave a real sense of the extent and the depth and the pervasiveness of the problem. And as a result, another blog was set up, which was called What We're Doing About What It's Like to Be a Woman in Philosophy, where women started posting, here's something I did, here's something my institution did, here's some good practice we'd like to share with people. And this also became huge, and it became, both of these became a real source for people to, first of all, understand and appreciate the problem, and secondly, to have some very basic tools to do something about it. Okay, so where do the women go, or where are these missing disabled or black potential members of staff? Here are a few explanations. Here are a few mechanisms that they won't explain the whole phenomena. I mean, each of these is of course very complex, but it'll give us a taste of some of the problems. And I'm really going to just focus on, very briefly, on 1, 2, and 4. So we have, as I said, some unconscious psychological mechanisms like implicit bias and stereotype threat, and also the phenomenon that is now called microaggressions, where some members of a community are made feel less welcome, unwanted, being treated with dismissiveness compared to other people in the unit. And this is what we call a chilly climate. But of course, a chilly climate is not uniformly chilly. It's only chilly for some people. So often the problem is that the people at the top, the line managers, the heads of department, the heads of schools, the deans, if you go to them and say, oh, there's a really terrible atmosphere in this department, they'll say, well, yeah, I visited them only last week and they were lovely. And so there is a differential perception of climates as being chilly. Okay, so I'll just very briefly touch on implicit bias and stereotype threat, which, as I said, were cognitive processes. They're very often unconscious, so it's difficult to get rid of them. It's, some people say, impossible to get rid of them entirely. And these processes influence the ways in which we judge other people, for example, on an interview panel, the ways in which we act, you know, how warmly we smile when we see a colleague in the corridor, and our performance in the case of stereotype threat. Now, some people, okay, I won't go into that. These are not kind of set in stone processes, but there is really good evidence that implicit bias is a very powerful mechanism that is difficult to overcome. So what implicit bias causes us to do is to perceive individuals and assess and interpret their actions in accordance with the social group's attributes, the social group they belong to, attributes. So for example, people feel less safe on an aircraft if the voice coming on the PA is that of a woman. They say, oh, I don't want a woman flying my airplane, for example. As I said, and this is, I think, the most important message, you can have implicit biases towards particular individuals and social groups, even if you are the most sincerely and explicitly egalitarian person in the world with the best intentions. And I think that's really important as a kind of reflexive exercise to be able to turn our gaze inwardly and kind of say, what in that situation made me feel uncomfortable? Why did I say that thing to this colleague? I'm on a hiring panel. Can I really justify preferring candidate A over candidate B? And then second, this is also really important, is that the biases are not only directed towards members of other social classes, they can also be directed towards members of your own social group. So notoriously saying, oh, we want to make our panels more inclusive and say, oh, well, we'll just make sure there's a woman on every interview panel. That won't solve the problem per se, because women can hold biases against other women just as much as men. Okay, I'll just give one quick example because I know time is of the essence. Okay, so this is a study of randomizing a CV. So identical CVs, identical information of them, were assigned a male or a female name at the top. And as you can see, both male and female participants, who interestingly were academic psychologists, so should be very aware of of implicit bias, they ranked the male applicant better for everything, and we're twice as likely to hire the male than female applicant in this particular study. And again, I'm sure if you asked every single one of these individuals, do you hold biases against women? They would say, no, absolutely not. Another example looks at the contents of reference letters written for medical staff. And I've looked at this and I thought, well, what do they put in the women's letters? The women's letters must be markedly shorter and less detailed than the men's if you look at the kind of information included. Stereotype threat is a self-directed mechanism which consists in the same schemas operating in a way that sabotages your own performance. So, for example, if you're a teacher and that you line up the kids to throw a ball, and you say, oh, now it's the girl's turn to throw, what you do by saying that is you activate stereotype threat. So the girls think, oh, I'm a girl, I can't throw very well, and they throw in a girly kind of way, as it were. So, again, if you see Chinese girls sitting in math tests, this is an American study, when the girl identity is made salient, and it could be made salient quite subtly, for example, by giving them a flower to color in before the math test, their performance is significantly worse than if you say, ooh, you're Chinese or Asian, you're very good at math, if you make the kind of opposite association. And the important thing here is that, for example, if you're walking a candidate down to an interview room, it's enough for you to kind of stop and then point to a door on the way and say, oh, by the way, the ladies' toilets are just over there. What you've done by that is you've triggered stereotype threat. So we have to be very careful about sending these, again, unconscious or tacit or very subtle messages to people. The same, that's another example, when black and white men play golf. If you tell them you're testing their natural athletic ability, the white men perform a lot worse. If you say you're testing sports strategic intelligence, the black men perform a lot worse. Okay, implicit bias and stereotype threat interact. So where you get the sense that others hold implicit biases towards you, and these are clearly manifested, that's enough to trigger stereotype threat. So you can see how people's performance can be massively affected by the social attitudes surrounding them. And these are the famous schemas that trigger implicit bias and stereotype threat. I'll just say one thing about microaggressions, which is, I think this is kind of a really important piece in the puzzle. So microaggressions are not the kind of thing that you can go and hand in a formal complaint form against somebody. Microaggressions are sometimes things that other people in the room don't notice, and microaggressions are the kinds of things that are very prone to being, when somebody voices a concern, to what's called gaslighting. So if I go and say, oh, did you notice I tried to talk in the meeting, but the person chairing just ignored me and I put my hand up, or in a classroom environment, wherever, it's very, very common for people, because the biases are implicit and because people overall consider themselves to be egalitarian, it's very common for, say, if you go to the chair afterwards and say, I raised my hand, why didn't you call on me? To say, oh, I'm so sorry, I just didn't see you, right? So it's really important to remember that we often get these really negative results without anybody actually having the intention to produce them. So what we want to do is we want to move people towards having an awareness of implicit bias, stereotype threat, and microaggressions, not so we can berate or humiliate or offend our colleagues, but so we can work productively, positively with people, with everyone in our own unit, in our own institution, to make a change for the better. So the one thing, well, this is for a separate occasion, I also developed some active bystander training, and the one thing I say in the active bystander training is don't feel that you always have to react in the moment, that you have to react publicly in front of other people. There's different strategies to deal with microaggressions, whether you are on the receiving end of one or whether you are witnessing one and you want to do something to prevent that from happening in the future. So I do urge you just to Google active bystander and get some ideas for strategies for dealing with microaggressions. But the most important thing is that we actually notice them and name them as what they are. So that was really 101 in 15 minutes, but hopefully it will help ease us into the panel discussion. Thank you so much.
So we do have time for one quick question, if anybody has one. In the meantime, can I ask the panel to take their seats for the next part? Do you have any questions? Okay, I think that leads nicely onto the panel. Let me just load up the slides.
Hi, nice to meet you. Welcome to the UK.
Okay, so this is a brand new thing for BQIT. This whole session is a brand new thing for BQIT, but in particular this panel. So we welcome our panel members. So just to introduce you to them, we've got Ying Lia Li from the University of College London, Lara Lalemi from the University of Bristol, Juani Bermejo Vega from the Free University of Berlin, Jonas Rademacker from the University of Bristol, and Havi Carel, who just gave our talk, also from Bristol. We plan to make this a very interactive session, so we thought we'd add a bit of guidance to you. So the questions that we're going to ask are pre-made from stuff we've spoken with for the panel and also from the chairs of the session, but also we've sent out a pre-panel form to a few participants. We got about just nearly 20 results back, so we formed questions from those. As I said, it's open, so please feel free. There is one roaming mic around the room. So please just put up your hand if you want to make a comment or ask a question yourself, and maybe just stand so the panel can see you when you ask the question. There are no stupid questions, so we want to make this a safe space. So please, if you have any comment at all, please feel free to ask it. But please keep them constructive. We don't want people to feel like their comments are being shot down. So before we jump into the panel, we thought, so even if you ignore maybe all the personal reasons why you might want to do or to tackle diversity or want a diverse team, we thought we found some interesting stats which even just for a completely numeric reason argue why you might want diversity. Sorry for the panel who now have to turn. So this is from a McKinsey report, this on the left-hand side, which shows that if you have diversity in your team, you're actually more productive and you make more money. So even if you just care about money, you should care about diversity, ignoring all the moral or social reasons why you should do that. And there is actually a paper on the archive, which is shown on the left, which actually talks about this for academia. So number of publications you get for having a diverse team and stuff. So it's quite interesting. So I highly recommend looking up these two sources. And so with that, Sabine, are you going to lead? Yeah.
Okay, so the first question we have for our panel is industry a more diversity-friendly place than academia, and why or why not?
Okay, hi. Please call me Leah. It's my middle name, but it's what I've gone with. So I used to work in the defense industry before I did my PhD. And so I would say in industry, it's actually harder to get your foot for the door. In academia, if you just stay around, do a master, do a PhD, there's not a barrier there. The barriers come much later on. However, in industry, as soon as you get your foot for the door, it's very hard because of HR and employment laws and labor rights for them to get rid of you. So in a way, you are protected. However, there is still a massive glass ceiling. And for example, there's only something like 8.5% of senior industry leaders that are in a minority group. Even worse than that is that 33% of senior management come from private schools. So here we can see that there's a social economic issue as well. It doesn't matter if you look different, if you're educated differently, that also affects you. And that's also very clear in politics as well. So at the moment, I'm actually trying to start a spin-out company. And what I've really noticed is that the deep tech kind of startup spin-out kind of environment is actually quite similar to academia. It's all based on forming a core team. It's you against the world. It's very easy for power play to happen. And especially for startups, the funding for female-founded ventures is really low. It's something like less than 10% of the total UK funding that goes to startups goes to female groups. And that's not just in STEM, that's across everything. And I refuse to believe that women don't want to be a boss or a CEO of a makeup company, of a company that makes some sort of food or something like that, across all disciplines. So there's clearly an issue that's not specifically down to STEM subjects as well. And even worse is that the kind of attitudes, which are really hard to quantify, I can give you stats for days on end, but it's really attitudes that matter. And so when the government did a survey on FTSE kind of 100 companies, why didn't hire women to be on the board, that's not women being CEOs, that's women being on the board of directors. A lot of the reasons were based on assumptions, such as, I don't think women like the stress. One of them was, I don't think a woman would fit in with us, and we already have one, we don't really need another one. So, you know, it's really subtle things like that, which kind of, obviously, if I heard that, I'm kind of a bit stronger, so if I hear that kind of thing, I'm like, screw it, I'm still going to try. But you can see how, you know, to someone who's 12, 13, 14, that really wants to have their own company, that can be really off-putting, and financially off-putting, because you just don't get the same amount of money. So I hope that kind of explained some of it.
Maybe a quick comment to that. So we've just learned, and I didn't know that okay, in industry and startups, it's bad, possibly even worse than in academia, but we shouldn't feel let off the hook by that. So, for example, funding, which is the equivalent of startup funding, is far worse in academia for women than it is for men at all levels. It starts with the applications, the amount of money applied for, the success rate of these applications. And one of the things I've experienced with, which Javi mentioned, which I found quite interesting, is this illusion in academia that because we are so smart and so wonderful, we don't do these kinds of things. And we do, and the statistics show it. And if you have doubts in your institute whether there's sexism or harassment in there, do a survey, collect some numbers, and you'll find it's there. It's not an island of wonderfulness.
Hi, so again, my name is Juani. I don't have much experience with industry. I worked like 9 years in academia, so I might be biased. But anyway, I've worked for a couple of employers and also have some projects with quantum computing companies. So I think I agree with most people said, and I think there is these issues on implicit bias and stereotyping that Javi mentioned, they are kind of a generic problem in society, so they are both in academia and in industry, and you have to be aware of them wherever you are. Of course, maybe I should mention, so I work with a lot of different types of groups because I was in a diversity, equal opportunity group when I was a PhD student. Of course, there's this obvious argument for industry that jobs tend to be a bit more stable, so you can find longer contracts than in academia, and you have sometimes less mobility issues. And these mobility issues can be actually a big problem for people who are from underrepresented backgrounds. For example, if you are a scientist with family or with kids, then moving is a hassle, or if you have some chronic health issue and you need a treatment, then moving is a hassle. Or if you come from some lower income family or some non-Western country, you might have more problems paying for visa applications, so moving is again a hassle. So I think it's important to have, better contracts that are tailored to more types of people, both in academia and actually industry as well. Something that I saw also in industry sometimes, but it's not a specific thing of industry, it's just a specific thing of some companies that I saw, is that they put some focus before hiring on team building. This is not, sometimes in academia, when you're hiring a professor, you're basing your, everything in terms of publication records, grant applications, and sometimes the emphasis on team building is a bit more diminished. This is something that you can do both in industry and academia, and it should be important in both places. So that's everything.
Yeah, maybe one of the our industry attendees or representative of the QTech program would like to comment if their experiences are matching similar experiences here. Should we cruise the microphone?
Hi, David Shaw. Hi, David Shaw, Fact-Based Insight. Most of my experience is in industry, and some of the same tensions that we've talked about, of course, they're there in industry. One of the things I'm very aware of from the experience of trying to deal with that in a business situation is often people have struggled with the whether it's male or female, taking time out in their career for caring responsibilities. And that's a challenge to deal with in industry, and clearly companies need to rise to that challenge. One of the things, though, that has struck me speaking to academics in the past is I would have thought that is an easier challenge to try to rise to in academia, but seemingly there is a problem there still. And is there an opportunity for the academic sector to actually create a great example by showing how people can rise to dealing with that challenge?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I mean, now you're getting onto the most sensitive territory for academics, which is promotion. You're absolutely right. I think what we've seen in the last few years is an increasing awareness that the simple kind of mechanics of just saying, oh, he or she took a year out to have a baby or adopt a child or whatever, so we just deduct a year off their academic age, and that there's a growing awareness that that's not sufficient. I mean, that is an important first step to say, well, and also if you want to take into account something like ageism, then you want to say, okay, I'm looking at the CV, I'm not looking at how old the person is or what they did, I'm looking at what they did that is relevant to the question I'm now considering. Is the CV suitable for promotion to this level, or is this person the best candidate to be hired? I think the other thing that is happening now is that there's a growing awareness that the criteria, what Juani was touching on, that is very focused on research and research alone. This idea that what we want to do is nurture the next genius physicist or medievalist or whatever. There's a growing awareness that you actually need to temper that by understanding that the academic roles have become much more complex, and there are many more pathways to make a contribution to the university through impact, partnerships with industry, what is called good citizenship, teaching innovation, all these different things. So there's a growing awareness that we have to move away from this monolithic model of saying, oh, we just want the top-notch researcher. Of course, we also want that, but there's more diversity, I think, in promotions criteria.
And in addition to that, I think this focused very much on promotion criteria, indeed a sensitive topic. I think a more profound problem is the career structure in our field. Typically, before you, oops, I pressed the wrong button somewhere. Hello? Yeah. Typically, before you even reach a stage where promotion is an issue to be discussed, you've had 2-year contracts, 1-year contracts, 3-year contracts. If you want to have a baby and benefit from any system within the university, but you're on a 2-year contract, you have to time it rather well to be in your contract by the end of your maternity year. You have to time it to a month or two. It's crazy, and this career structure is a big problem, I think, for everybody, men and women in this field. Many people would prefer a bit more career security, a bit more job security. People have to change country every 2 years quite often if they want to have a career. It's very difficult to sustain a relationship or have a family under these circumstances. And I think this has urgently to be addressed. I think it's one of the big deficits in academia.
Can I just ask how many of you are worried about your job stability in the next year or so? Like, it's not like, how many of you don't have a fixed contract that you're guaranteed to do what you're doing right now next year? Right. So now imagine if one of your parents gets really ill and you have to care for them for a whole entire year. Imagine if your partner or yourself, you have a child, or you have to take on some sort of responsibility. Imagine if you become ill, chronically ill, that you can't get out of bed. It's a really, really scary situation. And when we say diversity, we don't just mean something that you look different to everyone else. It means like fairness in all regards. So I'm happy to see that, a lot of you are experiencing things which we shouldn't necessarily have to go through in this way. And kind of caring about opportunity is kind of good for everyone, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Hi, Andy Collins, QTech. So Sabine we've deviated slightly, but I did want to pick up on the point you made. So we are part of the commercialization. I think you mentioned that it was very difficult for women in particular in the entrepreneurial sector. Now, given that I'm middle-aged, middle class and white, it's probably not, I don't know, that coming from me, that's going to sound a bit hollow, but our Deputy Director, Jane, is at the back there. I would recommend having a chat with Jane about the experience of someone who's experienced at being entrepreneurial in this kind of technology sector. Also, we're hiring, just so you know, for fellowships. So there you go, job offer straight away, subject to checks. And I think we've actually seen quite a lot more diversity in the hiring. Something that is difficult for us in particular is that perhaps there are not, on the subject of women in entrepreneurship, we are not seeing as many candidates come into us. And I genuinely don't know what the reasons are for that. And it could be just because in the deep tech sector, there are less women operating in that area. But I do know that Entrepreneur First, I believe they had almost a 50-50 split between people stepping up to their programs. So and I think there are a lot of investors who are willing to invest in that and follow that. So it's just, we do see quite a lot of diversity in people wanting to start up, and that's obviously a good thing. So that was just to answer the question earlier. Okay.
Thank you, Andy. I think this comment leads us quite nicely to the second question. Diversity is lost at all stages of academic career progression. Are these all caused by the same problems, or do we need to tackle diversity differently at different career points?
Hey, so I'm just going to talk about the last bit, but kind of answers all of it, really. So do we need to tackle diversity at different stages? No, what we, in my opinion, need to do is tackle it from foundations, from the very roots of learning. So that means primary schools. We need to have better funding in outreach programs. And that is so, basically, what everyone, and what in the events I've heard is there's no applicants, there's no black people applying, there's no Asian people applying, there's no women applying. And it's because we're not teaching them from a young age about sciences, about STEM, about the different arts that are available to them. So I think that's the most important thing, because we haven't built the solid foundations for children to learn on. As they're going through school, they feel like imposter syndrome. I felt imposter syndrome. I didn't feel like I could be a scientist. There's no way I had any vision for what I'm doing now. And that's simply because I saw no role models in my position. I saw no one trying to create schemes for me to try to understand how university works. I knew I was always going to university, but that's because of my parents. And BME parents are very much, you're going to university, you have no choice. So that's the type of thing that you have. And I'm not saying white parents don't do that, but it's more prolific in BME families. So because you have that, you know you're going to universities, but you're not really shown the subjects and how exciting they are and what you can do with it and the careers that you can go with it and where you can, possibilities. You're not really shown that. So the government and many schools haven't reinvested in that knowledge that children have. When you talk to younger people, you can find out from them that they are passionate about science. They do want to learn, but they just don't feel like they're good enough. And that can help with, if you have mentorship schemes with universities and with companies in order to foster a better community of knowledge. And I think that's what we haven't done, that's what we're missing. So because you don't have those young people, and those young people from a diverse amount of backgrounds, so in Black, BME people, LGBT people, disabled people, because you don't have that that basis and those young people that are inspired to do STEM subjects and become do businesses and run startups and be in your companies that are I can't remember, sorry, QTech and things like that, because you don't have those students that are inspired to do that, you don't get those students that are inspired to do those subjects at university. So because they're not inspired to do it at university, you can see that many universities, well, in Bristol, the number of applications are dropping for science subjects, and that's because you're not inspiring the young people to get into those subjects, especially from a diverse background. So anyway, so even within young university, there's no talking of retention and an environment, because university environments are hostile. They're still subtly, I'm not going to say racist, but they still have microaggressions that go on with them. Still have like racial implications like entwined into there. Like Bristol itself is the history of it. It's linked to slavery, and that is a fact. But do they celebrate that? No. So we're not identifying how to retain students, as in create a better environment for them to learn within. And then we're not encouraging more students to get into teaching, to inspire more students to get into. Do you see what I mean? It's a vicious cycle. We haven't dealt with that cycle yet. So that's why you're not going to get a diversity at different career points. There's no point saying, oh, I've got no diversity in my company, I've got no diversity, so what do I do? Like, more people need to apply. Like, you're not creating a pipeline for those people to apply. You're not inspiring young people. And even if you are doing schemes, there needs to be more. So that's my little 2 cents to that.
Yeah, I think, yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I just want to say, so the Institute of Physics have done a lot of research on the uptake of A-level and GCSE subjects in physics of school kids. And so Professor Peter Main, who's the head of physics at King's College, he is adamant that the last 20 years of outreach have been a failure, and the IOP agree with this. This is their official statement. Everything we've done for the last 20 years, sending speakers to schools, giving these 1-hour role model profiles or whatever, that has actually done more damage. Brian Cox has damaged physics in more ways than one, actually, but let's not go into that. And what it is to do with imposter syndrome. Imagine you are 12, some person rocks up to your school, they stay with you for 1 hour only, and they give you a talk about how amazing their work is, all the kind of positives, the freedom they have, they get to travel the world, to go to conferences, they get to be the world leader in a subject, and you're 12, you're not going to relate to that in any way whatsoever. In fact, most of the time it puts you off. It's the same thing as like the Beyonce effect. I love Beyonce, but she scares me, and I could never be like her, but that's fine because I don't want to be a singer. But it's that kind of thing. You look up to someone, especially when we're pushing so many physicists to go into schools even earlier. There's people going in for kids aged 5 and 6 doing these science talks. And I think that's something we can all improve on. If you get asked to do a talk at any level, just humanize yourself a little bit. Let's not lie. We've all struggled. We have all failed. I refuse to believe that no one in this room has ever had a paper rejected or has ever had reviewer 2 say something really nasty or an experiment has failed. And you need to really show that, because that's the things that I'm going to make children kind of relate and be like, oh, okay, it's not just full of genius people that, you know, are going to shout at me or think I'm an idiot for asking a stupid question or something.
No, I think that's a really good point. I had a question kind of leads into it. I think good outreach can be useful because it provides people with role models, and seeing somebody like them doing in science and academia. One thing we've struggled doing outreach in Bristol is that we have this kind of, a diversity tax. So if you're a group that we think should be represented, then people in those groups get asked to do outreach more often, and it ends up being actually a huge tax on their time and and research. And I was just wondering if the panel had any ideas how we can kind of tackle that, and maybe how people from not the diversity group, or not how, you know, somebody like me can actually help in these outreach sessions to maybe have a positive impact.
Hand it to me. So I'm actually like 3 intersections, so I don't mind saying them. So obviously I'm black, you can see that. A woman, and I'm gay. So for me, I do not get tokenized a lot, but I do get tokenized a lot. And I don't necessarily mind that. And I'll tell you why, because there isn't enough people like me, and there just simply isn't. So I choose. The question is, you should always ask. Like, I know it seems like it is tokenizing, but I'd rather be asked 100 times and say yes to 50 than be asked for 50. Do you know what I mean? Like, so for me, it's important for you to still go to them and still ask them, but also to, like I said, to foster a better community within your institution. So if you create more BME student networks where students can talk to each other, share ideas, create community, it feels like the burden's shared and not halved. Do you see what I mean? You have to share the burden. It's not my responsibility to change your minds, to change his minds, to change the government's mind about why I'm valid as a person. It's not my responsibility, but I take that on because I believe that no one else really is to the extent that they should have been doing 40 years ago. So because of that, yeah, I do it, but because it's not my responsibility, it's your responsibility to ask, if you see what I mean. So it's tokenizing is going to happen until we like bridge the gap, until there's more BME people there for you to ask. You're going to just have to provide support and mental health support and any kind of support. So it's about supporting those people as well as using them for, well, not using them, it sounds kind of like spoilery, but you know what I mean? Like, as in like helping them help you. Because like I said, as who I am, I want to do outreach. I want to teach children. I want to be inspirational to someone, at least somewhere in the country, at some point. Because for me, all you got to do is just inspire one kid or one student to want to be better and to want to do science or arts or whatever, and to push really hard for that. Like, you've only got to inspire one. So that's my opinion.
We have another question from Almut.
Hi. Actually, I wanted to make a comment. I think it's very great to put on an event like that and to have a discussion like this. But I've been on a few of those events, and I find it a bit of pity when we always drift into the margins by talking about women having the children or talking about outreach and blaming the schools for what the problems are. I think what we should probably use our time for is talk about the actual issues. We have 27% of women entering physics and a lot less at the other end. I think we cannot really solve the problems of the school. What we should talk about is how we can change the cultural environment in the university, and we should talk about how we can keep 27% that we are getting on board until the end. I think that's much more important. In Leeds we have done, for example, we have now introduced the code of conduct for our department, so where we defined what kind of culture we want to have, which helps, I think, with a lot of microaggression. And if universities change culture and how we deal with minority and how we deal with each other, I think that will also help. I think spending 1 year on maternity leave, and I have a daughter myself, this has not held me back. I think it's a lot more how we deal with each other and how we can change culture. That's much more important than wasting this time to talk about outreach, which I think is only a minor. It's important, but it's maybe not the main issue.
Andrew, do you want to? Okay.
Can I just say something? Sorry, I don't know your name. Okay, hi. Just to say, I think there's a huge arsenal of things we can do. And the thing I've been trying to press upon my own institution is that lots of them are free, okay? So, for example, doing in-house implicit bias training, doing in-house active bystander training. I think if you schedule, when you have your next departmental meeting, you say, okay, guys, I want to talk about these issues. So talking about stereotypes, and one thing that is known to be very useful is bringing up images and names of what's called counter-stereotypical exemplars. So if you're teaching undergraduates and you're using a paper you know is written by a woman or a non-white physicist, I put a picture up and I say, you see guys, this is Martha Nussbaum. She's the best, classics scholar of our century. Or the same, using people who don't have classically Anglo-Saxon names. There's lots of ways in which I think we can all be social justice allies by simply doing very, very small things in our everyday practice to make sure that the students are exposed to diversity, that they understand that they have come to a place that appreciates and respects diversity. And again, I mean, there's the whole side of processes and policies, and recently the university launched a program of appropriate behavior advisors. But I think processes and guidelines and policies have their limitations, and at the end of the day, if each of us, challenges one microaggression or puts up one picture of a woman or a BME scientist, that in a way will progress us, I think, at a grassroots level very, very effectively. And I've got a big list of, again, small things, cheap things, free things we can all do in our everyday work, and I'm very happy to share this more broadly.
I think we have another question from Elizabeth.
Hi, thanks. I'm Elizabeth Goldschmidt from the U.S. Army Research Lab. So I think in the U.S., at least, I don't know in the U.K., the pipeline in physics for women is actually not nearly as leaky as it is in a lot of other fields. So we kind of undergraduate to graduate to postdoc to junior faculty. It's not terrible. It's not as bad as it is in chemistry or academic medicine. Our big problem, like we were talking about, is people coming in. And I really like something that Leah said. So I think that a big part of our problem is that we think of ourselves as special. We make it seem like the only people who can be physicists are the most brilliant people who are going to go around the world and win a Nobel Prize. And that, I think, keeps a lot of people out. So I really like the idea of something we as a community really can do. Even if we're not doing outreach events, just when we talk to our friends and family. We don't need to make ourselves seem as brilliant as we like to think that we are.
I think it's also important to also educate people in the history of science. So, yeah, I just wanted to touch on something you said. So it is important showing students different images that aren't just a white cis het male. And one of those reasons is because there's been a plethora of African, Asian science and technology and engineering that we just aren't taught. And because of that, students don't feel like they can be or they have a history to do with science. So I never felt my history. I never really was taught about the abacuses that were built in Africa and things like that, different types of science and mathematics that stem from them. And because of that, I didn't really feel like as a black person that I could be a mathematician, or I could be, because it wasn't within my reach. Do you see what I mean? You have to go out and physically research a lot of the past and the scientists, whereas when I'm in university, I'm showing constantly white cis het males that have achieved this amazing thing that I felt like, obviously I'd never create an equation, that's not me, but because it hasn't been humanized, and because it doesn't feel part of your culture to do science and things like that. So I think as educators and as people, we have a role in educating our friends, our family, the people around us to learn more about history and learn more about diversity, because there has been diversity in science. Maybe not within this country, but there has been.
And just a quick comment, because I think your point relates very much to the original question, which is, I think for different groups, the leak is at different places. And I think your observation is that for women going into physics, it starts right from the beginning. For ethnic minorities going to physics, this is not quite so. At least if you look at the higher education sector globally. If you look at Bristol University, unfortunately it is so, but and at many other Russell Group universities. So there are different points where we lose people, I think, and we probably need different kinds of interventions at these points.
Okay, I think this is leading us nicely to...
Sabine?
So
I have something to say about solutions other than outreach. Should I wait for the solution discussion, or can I say it now?
Yes.
So relates to her question. Yeah. So because I agree with the question that was over there. Sorry, I missed your name. there are more things that can be done than outreach. I wanted to say that we organized a workshop, which Havi mentioned before, called QTAN, where we also had some initiatives to talk about community problems. So the idea was to, we can actually do much more, but it's important that we discuss issues like, problems on workers' rights, women, LGBT issues, health issues. So that all of these things can improve, but we need to some joint community effort. So what we did is to have a regular scientific program, but we also had some talks about community issues by invited speakers that were not from quantum information or not quantum computation. So we had talks about bias by Havi, about working conditions in academia in general, postdocs, etc., affirmative action programs, and a discussion like this. And actually, I think we had a nice setup. Like we had a very high satisfaction rates, about 80 applications for talks. We had travel grants, about 33. We secured a lot of money for people who were less privileged and couldn't come or had trouble securing the funding and supporting underrepresented groups. And it was massively popular. Like we had a very high demand for this program. So it was like 33 grants that we could have. And we had 130 applications for the entire planet, many indicating that they could not come to the event without funding. So all of this was quite nice. Actually, I'm very happy also that BQIT seems to be, following these trends, and it seems that the cast here is quite more diverse than in other workshops, and I feel much more comfortable than in some other meetings I've been to. Anyway, that was more my take.
Okay, I think we have to lead on. Unfortunately, we run out of time for question number 3, which would have been to discuss the unique challenges non-visible diversity groups face. So, for example, mental health or disabilities. And I have to jump over Bruno's question. We think it's more valuable maybe to discuss potential solutions, how we could improve diversity, which fits in what would different career stages ideally need.
I'm not going to answer the question really, I'm afraid, but I'll try to. Something that at least is connected to it. And one of the questions I wonder about is what could institutions like Bristol University and other Russell Group universities learn from former polytechnics, because they do much better in many ways. They recruit more black people, they recruit more people from ethnic minorities, and just touching on the previous topic, they are much better in recruiting the most underrepresented group of all, which is people from poor backgrounds. So I'm asking another question basically, but possibly related, rather than helping with the answer.
Hi, Alex Clark from Imperial College. With regards to that question about polytechnics versus Russell Group versus other universities, I mean, I'm not sure, because I haven't looked at the statistics, of whether this has been changing as we've been ramping up tuition fees heavily over the last 5 to 10 years. I haven't looked at the statistics, but I wonder, I haven't also looked at polytechnics, about whether they offer more scholarships or reductions in fees and things like this. The makeup of the UK society is very different financially and diversity-wise, and so there's just many factors that need to be considered within this. It would be also interesting to look at Scottish universities, for instance, where tuition fees are not charged for the Scottish people or people who live in Scotland, to see whether diversity is different in the makeup of those universities, because there are some especially good universities in Scotland still. And it will be interesting to look at the makeup of them from a diversity point of view, I think.
Just to quickly touch on the UE comment, because of the fact that we did an event with UE. UE have more people of colour in positions of power, and that is actually, because I've heard from someone who's Emmanuel Aduku, who was amazing, and he gave an amazing speech, and what he said was, when he got into that position, more people of colour flocked towards him, because it's a sense of community, like I've said. Like, it's a sense of something you know, and something, not every black person gets on with every black person, I'm not saying that, but what I'm trying to say is that when you feel there's more people around you that is like you and you feel like there's less of that glass ceiling, you're more likely to succeed, you're more likely to push harder, you're more likely to feel comfortable and less imposter syndrome. Imagine, like Leah said, like you have imposter syndrome. Now imagine you've got 3 different intersectional parts to that. So not only are you a woman, not only are you gay, but you're also black. And something black is something everyone sees. So do you see what I mean? Like when you've got people like in UWE that are in positions of power, like they started doing diversity events 5-6 years ago before Bristol even started. And the only first like in STEM event that Bristol did was when I started it. So, and it has to, I think with University of Bristol, with them, it has to come from the minorities themselves, which I have an issue with. It's not, you could have started a diversity in STEM event. Like, anyone could have started it. You don't have to be a minority to start a cause. But the problem is, a lot of people rely on minorities to be like, actually, sorry, this isn't great. I'm having a crap time. Please, can you make it better? And they still don't listen. So do you see what I mean? Like, you have to start listening to the minorities, understanding the root causes of why they don't want to stay in academia, why they don't want to come to your industry. And in that, we can understand why UWE are sometimes better than University of Bristol. So yeah.
I have something to say about one of these things, or two. So I do not believe in quotas at all. I believe in an equal opportunity, but not an assigned, here you go, this is the thing, welcome to imposter syndrome, because everyone's going to judge you on that. I will say something about funding distribution, which I think is something that literally does cause the leaky pipeline situation. So after your PhD, when you try and making it as an academic. So there is a group called the acronym, the Inclusion Group for Equity in Research in STEM. It's a group of academics, there's about 50 of them, but we get signatures from over 200 other academics in the UK. We actually lobbied the government. So Professor Rachel Oliver, who's at Cambridge University, she stepped up and she spoke in front of the Science and Technology Committee in Parliament, in front of Norman Lamb, and she asked for them to start an inquiry to look at how funding is distributed by EPSRC, UKRI, Royal Society, all these people that literally have the power to define your salary and also whether you get grants and students and equipment and everything you need to succeed. And this came because we did a Freedom of Information request. This was Dr. Michaela Kendall. She as a single kind of person, fought EPSRC to get the numbers to see who they were funding. And in 2016 to 2017, less than 7% of the total funding went to women. Did I do something? Press the button. Hello? Oh, fine. I was too still. I'm too stationary with it. Okay, so less than 7% of the total funding went to women. And okay, there's not that much women in physics anyway, but we still make up 20 to 25%. So that's still completely ridiculous. Even worse than that is, on average, if you were a female PI, you got 40% less than a male PI. So you can see how would you even be able to cope as a professor, as a senior lecturer? And so it's very hard to get the data on other kind of minority issues. So for example, socioeconomic is something we're really interested in, as well as your background, your race. These are really difficult things, but you have to start from data. We live in a world where data is used against people. So we need to have our own data to really show that there is an issue. I mean, I've spoken to female professors and they've had comments from EPSRC grants where they're attacked. There was one female engineer one of the comments basically implied that her male postdocs were more qualified than her. And you would not get this comment if you're a male PI, I guarantee you. And so these are really personal attacks that EPSEC said were fair criticisms for her grant review. So there's all these things that we feel, but we just don't have the numbers. But we are getting the numbers. So anyway, so Parliament decided they were going to take this on. So this year, the government is putting money behind this to collect that data so that we can actually analyse where people drop off and why. So there is good happening.
So I'm Roberto Desimoni from BAE Systems, which is a big industry player. The issue I want to know is the structure of the organisation can also affect the way how diversity is dealt with. I'm in a big organisation, but my division is a more consultative. Which means that we have lots of younger people in our organisation, and we don't have a hierarchical structure in the way that we're structured. So a lot of staff are heavily involved in recruitment decisions, and it helps because it means actually our staff want more EDI, they want more, more diversity, equality, inclusion, and they are pushing. There are senior managers, they are pushing them to make sure that we address these issues more frequently. The bit that doesn't get dealt with well is ageism. We're a young organisation, half of our staff in their 20s, 30% in their 30s, 10% in their 40s, and those in their 50s and above is less than 10%. So the ageism part actually is not very, and that's partly because we hardly have many older people. We had our first retirement last year in an organisation of 5,000 people. So, role models are an issue there. I think our organisation does well with issues of sexism, ethnic issues, less so, partly because of complicated defence injury clearances. Disability, not very good at, and ageism, pretty useless at. But we're addressing some of those issues bit by bit, slowly.
I know, I used to work for you.
You did? Great, okay.
Okay. Unfortunately, we are running rapidly out of time, but as you can see, there's a lot of things we should talk about or discuss about, and we ask our panel to prepare a take-home advice for you.
Okay, I'll do my take-home message. It's 1.5 take-home messages. One is to my fellow professors and senior staff. We are in a lot of positions of power where we recruit a lot. We might be sitting on funding panels. It is our job to embed EDI in these structures. And my other take-home message is, and you might not like that because you just said the opposite, but it's to the 20 and 30-somethings here. At the end, it will not work to wait for us old farts to sort this out, especially regarding career structure, which I think everybody here who's not yet got a lectureship is suffering from quite badly. Something needs to be done, and I think it will only happen if you shout, and if you get organized, and if you don't allow that to continue, because I think it's scandalous at the moment.
Well, I do agree with that in some part, not really. But it doesn't matter, we're here to discuss and debate. So yeah, my take-home message would be to inspire the people around you to learn about diversity, STEM, and the arts in the world around us and their history. Because the ability to teach and to learn and to develop diversity starts with knowledge. A lot of racism and microaggressions stem from ignorance, and that is what we need to change. We need to change ignorance, people's perceptions of what they think race, sexuality, and gender should be or should perform as. So for me, it's to start learning about the history and about your gender and about equality and about diversity and really get to grips with it and start educating people around you in order to make your workplace better. Start mentorship schemes, be the innovators that you want to see, basically, because like Han said, we don't get to the pleasure of just sitting back and waiting for someone else to do it. But it would be nice if everyone did it together as a community that we've created. So yeah, that's my message.
So I think my message is be uncomfortable, feel awkward. So, for example, I really like what Javi was saying, is even if you consider yourself the most liberal person in the world, we all have biases. We've all been raised in certain ways. Some things aren't your fault because you grew up in a culture where boys did this, girls did that. Your parents might have done specific jobs that kind of fitted in to, you know, who they were and stuff. And the only way you can kind of understand things is to feel uncomfortable. So I don't doubt there's one or two of you in this room who think this whole session is completely ridiculous. And I really want you to really dig down. Why do you feel that? Why do you feel uncomfortable? What is it that makes you hate the fact that we all volunteer our own free time, we don't take anything from anyone else, to do something like this? Really question if that's because you've never experienced anything, whether the system currently benefits you. It's totally fine to benefit off a broken system, but that doesn't mean you can't ignore when someone says, I've been sexually assaulted by my professor, I've been denied grants because I'm black. You know, I think it's really, really the only thing we can do is humanity-wise is to really accept that you have to feel uncomfortable to really understand how other people live.
Okay, so maybe I have one negative message and one good one. So the negative one is I want people who have never thought about implicit bias before to basically just, admit to yourselves, we are all biased. I am biased. I have implicit bias like every other human being. And admitting this thing is not a big problem. So there is women with biases against women, queer people with biases against queer people. I'm queer, by the way. And that's fine, just move on and do stuff. So maybe some pieces of advice for people who have never thought about these things and want to help, that could be even, or those of you who consider yourself allies. You can do a lot of small things that can help a lot. So there are these initiatives doing, workshops, doing discussions on equal opportunity, and it's just very easy to reblog them, talk about them to other people, recommend them to your students, and amplify the voices of these initiatives. That's actually super helpful. Another thing that you can do is, referee papers for these workshops. That's also quite easy. Help us get funding. That's also very important, very hard to do, and it's very important that other people help. Validate the voices of those who are weaker than you. You can basically just take the message of other person says that is maybe less privileged than you and just repeat it. Directly repeat it, and that helps. There is a quantum gender initiative on Twitter that you can find about raising inclusivity in workshops, and you can read it and maybe think about signing it. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention and pass the mic to Javi.
Thank you. Well, lots of take-home messages. I want to return to this idea that we're all social justice allies. And I also want to say that even if these high-level mechanisms like Athena Swan, well, they take years to go through an application and evaluation process. We don't have to wait for the top-down processes. I mean, they have their own place. They can be very effective. But I think what we can do is think about, again, the things we can start doing now, today. And again, I think each of us in our own small way can make a big difference. So going back to the point about giving up your own time, I probably do this 3 or 4 times a week. Is it at the price of my research time? Yes, it is, but I think this is just so super important that it just trumps my own kind of narrow personal interest in research. I really want to see universities in general, higher education sector in general, but also Bristol University in particular, which is where I work and the place I care about, changing. And I think each one of us can just carry, some of these tools with us, go back to our department, to our unit, to our school, and start kind of agitating. I mean, you talked about feeling uncomfortable. I think raising points with other people can make them feel uncomfortable. And it's, gosh, we're in British, culture. It's incredibly tactless, right, to make somebody feel uncomfortable. But sometimes it's important. Sometimes I think processes, decision makings, departmental meetings, things can just go by and then you think, actually, I'm not very comfortable with this, or I don't think this is okay, but you don't feel able to speak up. So again, going back to this idea of active bystander and having kind of an arsenal of things you can do, make yourself able to respond whether in real time or after the fact, give yourself the tools to either go and talk to your line manager, to talk to the person, to give support to somebody who you think may have been offended. I think how things are going to change is by us individuals going into work tomorrow and doing one small thing to promote EDI.
Okay. Then on this note, let's thank the panel. Thank you for everyone coming to this session. So right before we go into lunch, I just want to let you know we have some diversity posters hanging in the poster session, so that should give you a place where you can continue discussions if you don't want to do that over your lunch. Thank you.